poor people here who have dated rich people. What did you learn? How was the contrast? She was a full-time professional fine artist, oil painter. Dad was a pioneer in green energy. Whole family is loaded as a result. She was able to focus on school, her MFA, travel the world on residencies, etc. She was wonderful, and goes to show you that when you have a well-adjusted upbringing, support, and the money to provide resources, you can be who you were born to be. Absolutely could not relate to the socioeconomic struggles of the people she dated, though. He didn't have any concept of saving money. It was always just there, because his money was always earning money. Having money was an income stream of itself. Also, he had no concept of how much anything cost. I grew up very blue-collar poor. The men I knew fixed cars, re-roofed their own houses, knew plumbing and electrical stuff, etc. My husband grew up very wealthy. His family had a massive house, a pool, a vacation home in Spain, and maids. Honestly, the contrast was stark. The first thing he did after we moved in together was put liquid dish soap in the dishwasher. He didn't know anything. He didn't know the vacuum needed to be emptied. It could have been a deal breaker, but he fully embraced his ignorance and learned. It was a whole new world, and he loved it. One of my favorite memories is of putting up our first Christmas tree. He'd never been part of that and got so much joy from it. I dated two dudes with trust funds. I learned no amount of money can make you forget your mommy/daddy issues. The family was an entity in itself and had rules. Relationships are everything. The family itself is a thing. The club, the parties, the vacations, the homes, the cars, the business, it's all about the family. The patriarch, the traditions, the schools, the business partners, and the neighborhood and the club. It's not a bad thing, it's just different. I was raised to be independent and get the fuck out of my parents' house. They stick together like GLUE. Everyone has a role to play, but they have security and they belong. I never belonged anywhere. I was raised by people who had kids because that's what you were supposed to do, and then I got the fuck out of their house when I turned 18, and that was that. Never knew. She worked a normal job, lived in a normal apartment. It wasn't until someone told me after we broke up she moved for work that I found out her family was minted. Dated the daughter of a wealthy member of parliament for my country's Conservative Party. During diner discussions at their home, it really hammered it home how little her mother, the MP, understood about the daily reality of being poor. I did. My first boyfriend. His family was wealthy, but grew up poor. They were as down home and wonderful as possible. Never forget your roots. I dated a couple. I grew up adjacent to wealth, and first off, they were lovely people, caring and thoughtful. But the truth is, they were simply unable to understand poor. What I realized was that the struggle to afford things binds people together. And working towards a common goal, say a trip or a more expensive item, is a reward that couples can share together. We did it, they'll say. I also realized just how much the subject of money comes up in any relationship, and if you aren't in the same boat financially, it's alienating for both of you. Hard to get past that in most situations. I wouldn't say I was poor, more average. But the two wealthy women I dated were both quite spoiled. They expected to get their way, and what was interesting for me was that they both expected their money to open doors and solve problems, rather than using courtesy or charm. My ex-best friend was the same. What was very noticeable for her especially was the smallest thing was a crisis. People who have never dealt with true pain or loss because they've always been shielded from it are upset by small things. She just seemed like she was very used to getting her way. When I was 26, I was making around $20K as a server. I dated a 32-year-old corporate attorney who was making $300K. I think the biggest thing it showed me is that I was capable of more in my life. For a long time, I thought I was just going to be a server because that's all I could do. She showed me to want more and to strive for more. I'll always be thankful to her for that, because she changed the trajectory of my life. I went back to school and have a different career now. She pushed me to want something different, and it's something I didn't know was possible until I met her. She was on leave from a work injury, and she was saying she's getting a certain amount. Her mom was like, wow, that's not a lot at all. I was in the back seat thinking, she still makes more than me. She's cool though, not spoiled by life or anything. She had a net worth of 40 million or so, and didn't earn it due to her family being very wealthy. She was so disconnected with the real world and was a true narcissist. Everything had to be her way, including aspects of my personality. It was constant nagging about aspects of me she didn't like and wanted me to change. She was very manipulative, and the moment I started to push back, she ended it. Wild ride. I'm not poor, but came from a working-class average family, and I do very well for myself now. Around 30, I dated a girl who I knew was rich when she told me to pick her up at her parents', and when I Googled the address, the place had a gate to get in. She worked an honest teacher job and was very humble, kind, and grounded. I didn't notice small things like for her birthday, she said she was going to buy herself $1,200 sandals. Ain't no teacher buying those. Things fizzled out after a few dates, but I always wonder how / if people could date with such disparity in family socioeconomic classes. Found out after, her family is worth like $500 million. Always have a way out. People with money know it's a tool to control people and will use it. If you find you're staying because you've been trapped without ability to financially survive, well, no bueno. When we would vacation, I would get threatened abandonment in another place that I couldn't leave, so I'd have to comply. Dinner on him, and we argued at the restaurant. Give in, or he will pay only his portion. It was all control. Now I let people treat me, but always am able to cover my flight back. Don't pay for me to control me. And I knew it'd get worse with kids and being married. You're at a rich person's whim if you put total trust in them for care. They've got rules of decorum I do not understand. Didn't make it past the first date. My wife, before we met, went out with a rich guy on a first date. Instead of inviting her to his house, he invited her to a lavish vacation. She was like, I have work on Monday, and considered him a creep. Another ex of my wife sold a company to Microsoft and got a lot of money. He rolled up with a Jaguar thinking he would impress her. Now, she knows nothing about cars, so she said something like, "You got a new Hyundai?" And it wasn't a joke. She literally thought he bought a Hyundai. So, whenever I see a Jaguar with my wife, we point and say, "Look, it's a Hyundai." And an ex of mine lives in Canada now and went out on a date with an NHL hockey player, which I guess is the equivalent of having dating Jesus or something over there. Anyway, she was a little happy but annoyed that she appeared in a newspaper back when newspapers were a thing. Spend money with the mindset that it will come back to you tenfold. I dated a girl. She was a nurse, and her dad was an HP CTO. She never had any problems with money because new car, dad, new TV, or washing machine, dad. She didn't understand being a nurse usually wouldn't grant her all that. Vacations in Aspen or Switzerland and whatnot. When I told her I most certainly can't give her that life, she dumped me. Class of person comes down more to innate qualities as opposed to material wealth. Sometimes the only real difference is the family they were born into. She was never flaunting it or trying to show off, and felt bad when she did so by accident. But there were times where she was obviously out of touch. Growing up where I'm from, it's rare for me to think of any girls that weren't wealthy. Our family, on the other hand, was lower middle class. One girl I've dated, who also had the worst mental health issues, was the most well-off in her family. Her dad paid for a brand new car in cash, Chevy Equinox, paid for her college in full, and paid her rent in full, and covered all living expenses when I met her. I, on the other hand, have paid myself for everything I owned and the education I have. She didn't understand or couldn't estimate the cost of anything. I can remember when I asked her, "How much do you think I make a week?" And she said, $20,000, faced with tears of joy. I'm 23 BW, I was 21 then. I just felt this massive sense of not being enough for her. I hope every day I might be able to find a girl who is just happy to be with me and doesn't care about what I have. Until then, I'll feel lonely. The guys I dated with money tended to come in different shapes and sizes. There were humble ones who got wealthy after growing up with a normal childhood. The ones who were born into money tended to be entitled, low in empathy, possessive, and unable to take no for an answer. I wouldn't want to date a born rich guy again, much less be in a long-term relationship with one. Honestly, he was poor, but his parents had money. Never move in with one who had access to more money than you. You are the one who ends up homeless with nowhere to go. Not a good idea. Never move into a house bought and paid for by someone else, because that's not your home. It's their home, and they're just letting you live there until they don't care anymore. Her dad owned most of the real estate offices in the state. They all looked good, but were weird as shit. Her brother basically only ate sardines and crackers. She was vehemently anti-vax. Schitt's Creek wasn't funny to them. They're less empathetic, some exceptions. He didn't know what struggle was. Any inconvenience I had was appalling to him. I also found him boring. I guess when you go through struggles, you become a more interesting human. We were both 20, and although she wasn't rich on her own, her family certainly was. We had been together for quite some time before I went and actually visited their home. It was massive, and they had so many nice things that caught me off guard. To be honest, it was one of the things that semi-ruined our relationship. I'd hear them complain about money and things they couldn't get, and then they'd say, "I'm just gonna ask my dad." Meanwhile, I was struggling to pay rent while doing manual labor for 12 hours a day. I don't know if it was just me, but I wish there would have been some sort of warning about their status. Showing up to their house blind, like, that was a little too much. My wife's parents were loaded. She went to a posh private school, etc. I learned lots about how many resources fancy schools have compared to the state ones. The most hilarious I remember was that for my final design and technology project, I built a clock, which was basically some bits of MDF with a couple of quid clock mechanism attached. My wife built a fucking hovercraft, like one she could race around a field. The biggest impact on her now is that she struggles a bit with budgeting and saving. Because it wasn't really a thing while she was growing up. If wanted something, she could just have it. She was an MLB player's daughter, and I was a walk-on from an incredibly poor family, 6 people in a 2-1 house. I learned from her dad that having multiple streams of income should be your goal. Ever since I have kept 2 to 5 streams at any one time. His daughter and I are friends, but my wife gave me the push I need lead to get over the top. Partner born to wealthy family, generational subdued wealth. International trips a few times a year, live-in housekeeper, best schools, NOLS, sports, and art exposure. Good person, gave back with volunteering and donations. Contrast, could not relate to debt, fears of homelessness, or money anxiety. Biggest contrast, never afraid to try new things or make mistake. Took a job that didn't work out, that's okay. Family will keep you afloat until you find something else. Broke a leg overseas because you took a skiing risk in Italy. No worries, we'll charter something or find a way to get you out. I don't have that kind of freedom. He was horrible with money. Had no idea where it went. Still had tons of debt, despite having no kids and no mortgage and making $250K a year. I was making $25K a year. In my PhD, I dated the daughter of a very rich couple. Shortly before we started dating, she developed a disability that prevented her from finishing her studies and severely hindered her career options that would let her keep her standard of living. Unfortunately, she turned into a complete miser. We split most costs, but apparently she was keeping detailed track without telling me or communicating up front that she would prefer to be exacting. And I was apparently one grocery run behind her, and this was the biggest deal of the century. One Christmas, she got me a $60 hoodie, and I got her a $25 book, and this was also a huge fucking deal, TM. I dated a very wealthy older woman who grew up with and inherited millions. She bought me so many nice things and paid for my gym membership and all our activities. We'd hang out in her sauna and have wild sex in her massive bedroom. Too bad, she got extremely possessive and controlling, freaking out if I glanced at other women or didn't reply instantly to texts. I would have panic attacks about bills and expenses, then she would call the place, give them my info claiming to be my fiancé, and just pay it off. Money was a thing to her, but it was the source of all of my anger and anguish. She cared more about things money couldn't buy, and it was a good 6 months. I got boring, and I had too many problems you can't fix quickly. Some rich guys I dated when I was younger were shocked that I did not own a car in a city with tons of reliable transportation and nowhere to actually drive when I was 18. Like having a car was so important for status even if you didn't need it. Never mind the fact I lived in a row home with a street parking dilemma. I was trashy for not having a car. As I was older, I dated a few rich or close to rich guys. They seemed less judgmental on the surface, but liked the idea of being in control and thought they could keep me with their shitty behavior just because they had money. They like a bit of rough, but never let their family or friends know. The ridiculous amount of presents at any given possible situation.